Okay, friends, so we are now recording. Welcome. It's our last lecture. And for the next 30 minutes before we have our great career services team come in and help, we're going to talk just about some theory about GitHub. So you might ask yourself, what on earth is GitHub? And I think before we even talk about that, we have to understand, well, what is this thing called Git? And really, Git is what we call version control. Right? So I'm just going to actually annotate and write that. So Git equals version control. And does anybody know what version control is? Like, can you think of any examples or what is version control first and foremost? Can anybody tell me what they think? Or I guess try and just, well, what do you think version control is? When updates are pushed out, saved iterations. Yeah. iPhone updates could be. Yeah. Yeah. One example would be if you guys have ever used, maybe I'm dating myself here, but back in the day, we didn't have any sort of, right now you have like Google Docs, right? And so on Google Docs, I can go in and I can write a paper, and then I can go and I can edit my paper, but I can go back and see the different versions that I had, right? So maybe I have this like document. I got this paper that I have for some class, right? And I write it. Here's my, what we used to call a rough draft, right? So here's my rough draft. But what would happen is back in the day, you would then have your rough draft, and then you would basically like make a copy, or you would edit it some way, and then you'd save it, and then you'd save it as something else, right? So it'd be like we'd have another one on our computer right here, and this would be called final draft. And then you would get a idea later on in the day or at night or cramming, right? And then you would go and you would change your paper. So you make a copy and then you'd save it again. And then it'd be like final draft. And this went on, right? And you had all these different versions of this one paper. Well, now moving forward, and we have the cloud, we have Google, we have the Google Cloud, we have Microsoft, right? To where we can kind of go and look back and say, okay, I have different versions. If I edit something, I can go and revert back to, the paper without the edit, right? So let's say that I was working on some paragraph here, like this paragraph, I crushed it. But this paragraph right here in the blue or purple or whatever this color is, like, I was like, I don't really love it, but it's different. I want to keep it, but I don't know if I need it. And I'm going to keep my rough draft. I'm going to have my final draft, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to go ahead and change it. And maybe I changed it, but then I didn't. I changed it here, right? And I changed it to something different. I wrote a lot more. And then I go, yeah, you know what? That's really like losing sight of what's going on. So I'm going to revert back to this. And so you would go here and then you'd start again. And so it's this like having multiples of something, right? Can get kind of confusing. And Carl said, yeah, like adding a 1 to the title, and then you have a 2, and then you have a 3, and then you have a final 1, and then final 2, and then it just keeps getting crazy and crazy. Now we have the technology, and we're moving forward to where you just have one document. And if I ever need to, I can go back, right? And all my different saves, instead of having 3 different documents, I just have my paper, right? I would just have like my, so let me erase all this. So instead of having a rough draft, a final draft, and a final draft, I would just have my paper. And then with all of this, what I can do is there might be a little click down or a little drop down or something, maybe on the side here. And then I can click it, and there's different versions, right? So if I wanted to revert back to my rough draft, boom, it brings that up. If I wanted to go to the draft that had the one paragraph that I just started, boom, I can bring that up. And so it just allows me to kind of go back and forth, right? If I break something or I write a bad paragraph, I can always just revert back to what it used to be. And this is what we call version control with code, right? And so one thing to note is that when we are dealing with code, sometimes we go in and we might have a bug, right? And so we're like, okay, great. We know that this works, but it has a bug, but I want to go in and I want to try to fix it. And if you guys have ever done anything like around the house to like fix something like a handy person, you might realize that sometimes when you're fixing it, you actually make things worse, right? So you try to fix the faucet and now this other thing's leaking. You're like, what on earth? And you're kind of like, wow, this is worse than it was off. I wish I could just revert back. So what Git allows us to do is, let's say we're trying to fix a bug, and then in us trying to fix a bug, we actually bring down the entire platform. Well, we don't have to go then try to piece everything together. We can say, oh, nope, let's go back to the version that was not broken, had the little bug, but not broken. So that way my platform can at least be up and running and I can fix it that way too. Or it allows us to create, and we'll see when we talk about a branch, to where it's like, if I make an edit, it actually doesn't affect the code until I want to make sure, okay, this is fixed. This doesn't break my code. Okay, I can merge the two together. So that's what we call Git. Any questions on Git? And you will have to, this is something separate from GitHub. So I just wanted to really, really make sure that you guys know that Git is a version control. Really important to know. This is it. This guy right here. This is Git, right? This is what you will use, right? And every job will work this way too. Every job that I've ever had, you will use Git. Now there's different tools like GitHub, like code repository, all kinds of stuff. There's different tools that you can use, but at the very end, or at the very below portion of it, the base of it is Git. So you will have to download Git. So if you don't have that downloaded, I will put this in the chat. I think it automatically recognizes what type of operating system you're on. So I'm on a Mac, so I think it automatically does that. But if not, you can see like the Windows build here, et cetera, et cetera. So you will be using Git. I can guarantee it. Guarantee Git. Get it? Okay. Any questions on version control? That's just a high level. Obviously, we're not going to get into the weeds of this. This is just a theory sort of idea. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Cool. So we have this version control, and similar to how we talked, we have a couple different ways, right? If I've got a paper, I can put it on Outlook, right? And on OneDrive. Or I can put it on like Google Sheets, right? Or Google Docs. Both are options to kind of do the same thing, right? I have a paper. I want to keep track of the different versions. Which one do I want to use? And that's where GitHub comes in play. So GitHub, all it is just a tool to manage your version control. That's it. There are other options than GitHub. GitHub absolutely is the king of version control. I would definitely say, if you're going to get used to any of them, definitely do GitHub. But there are other options there. So just so you know, GitHub is not the only one that you can do this with. And there's other ones within Amazon like Code Commit and a couple different other ones. But GitHub is kind of the leader, the market leader for sure for hosting what we call a repository. In the same way that I was talking about a paper, like a some sort of rough draft paper, we call that just like an essay. And code, when we're talking dealing with code, we call that a repository, right? That'll be just our repository or repo. If you see repo, it just stands for repository. It's just, you can think about it like your code essay, right? It's just your same sort of thing. So this is a way that we can manage it in the same way that if you want to go to Google Docs or Microsoft, we use GitHub. Now, GitHub is owned by Microsoft. What you'll find out very soon is that most things in development is owned by Microsoft. VS Code is owned by Microsoft. GitHub is owned by Microsoft. OpenAI is owned by Microsoft. LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft. Yeah, it's either Microsoft or Google really that owns everything. And then occasionally Amazon sprinkles their way into things. But from a tools perspective, definitely it's Microsoft. Cool. So what you'll want to do is you'll come here And this is just github.com. I'll put this in the chat for us. And what you'll do is you'll want to create an account. Now, this is really important because it's going to allow you to host your code. All hosting your code means is in the same way you're saving your essay in the Google Cloud and anywhere you want to access it, whether you're in China or you're in England or in the US, doesn't matter, given that you have a VPN if you're in places that maybe you can't access Google. But as long as you can get to Google, no matter where you're at in the world, if you're in the middle of the ocean or if you're wherever, you can access it. Same sort of thing. This is just a repository, a cloud basically for your code. That way you can go and you save it. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to sign up. Sorry. You're going to sign up for GitHub. If you haven't already, I would absolutely encourage you to do that. Again, this is the king or the queen or the just market leader for repositories. So you definitely want to sign up and get a GitHub. Now I'm going to sign in. Give me a second. If you guys haven't already, I would start getting used to two-factor authentication because there is, okay. If you haven't already, I would start doing two-factor authentication just as you guys get more into tech. People are more likely to say certain things or try to hack you. So having two-factor authentication is one way, whether it is via text message or using an authenticator app. Start taking cybersecurity serious. Cool. So whenever you create a GitHub, you're going to create a profile, and this is what others will see. Now, this is customizable. Obviously, this is myself. My middle name is Cody. And so some people know me as Cody. Most people, I go by Will professionally, but lots of people know me as Cody. So that's why you're like, what the heck? That doesn't make sense. So this is my profile. And there's a couple of things that are important here. Here you can see kind of like all of my repositories. And so what you can see is that there's some code, right? And so if I have some sort of like, let me see, I don't know. Yeah, we'll just actually go to here. So here is my MERN, because I taught MERN, so the JavaScript stack. And here's all of my code, right? And so as you can kind of think about it is here, I go to week 1, I've got a folder called week 1, and then I have some files, all same thing from kind of like what we have for VS Code, right? If I go to week 5, we'll start seeing that I've got lecture 1, I've got a server folder, models, I've got like JavaScript, and you can see here's my code here for this model. I've got a config file, and it's just a way that I can access my code, right? I can access and see. What's great about it is others can also do this. So when you think about recruiters, or you think about other people kind of seeing your code, they can see how you write code. Are you efficient or are you not, right? Are you sloppy? Do you have comments? How do you do your code, right? What kind of code is there? How do you, what tools do you use? So it's just a way that people can see that. And then also if you're working with a team, this is a great way to have some sort of stability and basically be able to interact with one another. So this is kind of how it looks. Now, the thing that's important and why I said to, we're not going to get into like how to create a repository and how to do that. We'll get into that when we get into web fundamentals. But one thing to note is that, and it's stupid, in my opinion, it's very, very dumb, but recruiters love GitHub. When you are dealing with a tech company, oftentimes they will hire somebody to recruit you, to try to bring in. The way it works is they say, hey, I need a developer that knows how to do Python and is entry level. Cool. So they'll tell this company, and this company will go and try to get recruits and try to get people and say, okay, hey, found this job for you. You'd be perfect. And then once you get kind of going, you're going to get a lot of that stuff on LinkedIn, which is great. Recruiters are awesome. They're not the enemy. But just know that if you get hired, they get paid, right? And so it is advantageous for them to get you hired. So it's not like they're kind of the bad guys. You get hired, they get paid. So they want you to get hired. One thing that they will look at, and it's very, very dumb, but it's a funny joke within the development world, is this guy right here, this contribution settings, right? So it'll look at how many contributions have you done within the last year. Now, as you can tell, mine's not very good. I don't have a ton of contributions. Why I say it's dumb is my company doesn't use GitHub, it uses code commit from AWS, right? And so if looking at this, you might think I haven't coded in, almost a year. I've barely coded within the last year, when in React, it's just not on GitHub. So that's why I say it's sort of silly. If I didn't put something to GitHub, this just says how many contributions did you do that day. So if I did 1 or if I did 5, that's what this color change is. So like less and more. And so it doesn't really account for how much you're coding. And then on the other hand, you could just change one letter and post it to GitHub and go through that every single day. And then all of a sudden it looks like you're coding so much, right? Which would then probably be like a red flag for them. It wouldn't make sense. So, but unfortunately, recruiters don't know a ton about tech. And so they sit and they're like, oh man, he doesn't really develop very much. This isn't a passion of his, blah, 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 blah. So just know that by having even just a history of posting this stuff, and since you guys are learning how to code and you guys are doing that, it's a great idea to have lots of coding opportunities and hosting to GitHub and posting to GitHub and having like different tools and different things, right? So definitely make sure that as you're going through class, like one thing I wish I would have done and what I would have learned is whenever I was first learning how to code, for a long time, I didn't put anything to GitHub. I sort of just saved it on my computer, or I did other things, but didn't really utilize GitHub as much. So I would say to definitely start using it. And again, we'll talk about this on how to use it, but this is just a way that they can see how much you're contributing. Again, what's nice is if you are doing things, it's a great way to kind of show people what you're doing and what you're learning. So for example, I taught for Microsoft. Microsoft used to do these things called reactors. And so they would get people to teach different languages or different things. And so I taught, I think 5 of them for Microsoft, whether it was for, I taught 2 languages, one called Rust and one called Go. And so this is like all of my code for that, right? So when Microsoft, I was like the guest lecturer. You go in and there's just some basic code here that we talked through. And it's like, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean? How do we do this? That we'd build and talk about the foundation and how do we build all that good stuff. But a recruiter might look at that and say, oh, okay, they like I taught for Microsoft. Okay, that's cool. That's a good point to know, right? It also does talk a little bit about languages. And so if you hear my pins, but if I've got like my projects here and you see like my most recent projects, you can see that it also talks about my languages, right? And so here, if I've got, if I click on this folder here, we can see that 63% of all my code here is in JavaScript, 24% in HTML, and 12% in CSS. So if you're creating a project, it's a great way for them to see, especially if you're applying for a job that's in Python and you have this as your capstone project. And you're like, look, hey, this is mainly in Python. That's a really, really good thing to know. So it does help you there as well. Okay, I'll pause there. Any questions so far? So somebody asked, is there a way to auto put the code you make on GitHub? No, and there's a reason for that. If it is intentionally a thing that you have to kind of go through a process. And the reason is because if I want to put code on GitHub, right, I want to make sure, like if I'm pushing it, it's called pushing to GitHub. It's kind of pressing the save, right? I want to make sure my code works. If it auto did it, and maybe my code broke, then I can get in a weird version portion, right? We haven't talked about versions, but we can kind of talk about them a little bit. So here it's called a commit, right? And so this is sort of saying like, hey, I've saved this, I've tested it, I'm good to go. And here we can see like, hey, I started out, I created the class repository, and this is this version. If I wanted to click on this, This is my dog Marley. This is the one that has seizures. What a fun serendipitous thing. It's my dog Marley, and this is my dog Charlie. They're the best. But you can see, okay, for that one save, quote unquote commit, this is everything that was added, right? And so if I want to be like, oh, what did I do this one? This is it, right? And then if I'm like, well, cool, I want just specifically this, right? Then I can go and I can click on that. If we auto did that, right? And we didn't have a commit, we didn't have a process to do that, it would be really challenging to go with each version. Because especially if it's on auto save, right? It might update 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 times when you are saving and writing code, right? Especially if it's a longer profile program. And so you do want to be diligent sort of in what you commit and what you're pressing save as, because then it creates sort of a timestamp. It creates okay, this is what I did. Here it is. And so if I want to revert back, it's much, much easier than it being auto updated. But great question. Love the idea of automation. Keep that in your mind, Joshua. If you can automate things, that's great. There's a wonderful book and sometimes on Udemy, it's free, but it's called Automate the Boring Stuff with Python. So whether you're taking Python or not, it's just a great idea to like, just to kind of get you to start thinking, what in my life could I automate? And that's honestly where a lot of the biggest companies come from. It's just somebody saying, it's just kind of a pain point in my life. What if I made it better? What if I made a tool that got rid of that? Or you think about like Slack, right? Slack's like a messaging service between companies. It's like, man, I work in my office. I don't want to have to get up and then go ask somebody something or call them or shoot them an email. What if I could just like quickly message them? It's like, oh, great. Like that's where Slack came from. So the name of the book is called Automate the Boring Stuff. Now, obviously, I would say to hold off on that book until you learn web fundamentals, and even really till you learn Python, if you learn Python or just whatever language. So I would say wait the next couple of days. Because then, or next couple of weeks, sorry, not days, because then I don't want you to get over your head and be very confused. So wait a little bit, but it's a great book in the long run. If you're maybe have like a tally of what you want to keep track of, you can do that. And Automate the Boring Stuff is a great one. Yeah, Corey, automation's good. It's good until it's not, but I like it. That's funny. What do you think outside the box? Okay. So that's really GitHub. It's just, if we're doing like the TLDR, too long, didn't read, all GitHub is a way that I can save my code, and I can save it in such a way that I can have different versions if I wanted, right? And I can look at my code and say, okay, great. Here it is. Here's all the code, and anywhere I'm at, if I get a brand new computer, my code's not lost, right? That always happened to back in the day. If you had your paper and it was on your computer, but then your computer got wet or just stopped working and your paper was on there, it's ruined. Now it doesn't matter what computer I use. Here is my code. Here it all is. Okay, we are good to go here. So you sort of think about it just like a cloud storage system for your code. It is more in depth than that, but definitely do that. One thing that I'm going to absolutely hit on and say is when you are signing up, you might be introduced to this guy right here. Introducing GitHub Copilot X. My encouragement is to stay far away from that. Now, the reason I say that is I use GitHub Copilot X and it rocks. It is a tool that most programmers are going to use or do use. I think 74% of code since it came out has been written, or 74% of code posted to GitHub has been written by Copilot. It is an incredible tool. It also will do everything for you. And the reason I say to not use it, because you might be like, dude, what? That sounds amazing. It is. It really is. It really is an amazing tool. When you are trying for a job, you will not have this GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot is not perfect. There are issues with it. It will give you the wrong code. And if you don't know what you're doing, then it'll break your program. I've had plenty of students who have tried to use it, get very confused, fail the exam because they don't know what's going on. I do use it usually when I teach. I didn't for you guys. Usually when I teach, because as you guys have probably learned by now, I am terrible at spelling. And so this kind of alleviates that. And so, so it basically allows me to, we'll do Python. Yep. Oh, here we go. It allows me to do a bunch of things really quickly. Like Paul said, you guys are here to learn. And so if you don't, if you use GitHub Copilot, you are going to, I'm 1,000,000% telling you, you will hinder your own learning. And when you go to try to go against a job against somebody who didn't use this throughout the boot camp, you will be hindered, right? You will not going to guarantee you lose, but it'll be much, much more challenging. It is a cool tool. Like I'll show you. So you can do things like, actually it's this because Python, like function that gets me all odd numbers from a list or from 12 to 30 range. Cool. Let's get up Copilot. It just did the entire thing for me. Oops. The entire thing for me. It's really cool. Again, if you don't know what this is, or if this doesn't work, or what this is, it's only going to hinder you. So I just say that as, just like Paul said, you guys are paying a lot of money to learn. This will hinder you. You cannot have this on an interview. There's different ways to utilize this. And I promise you, I do not shy away from it. I think that it's an incredible tool. And so I will talk about it more, but if you guys are signing up, and I just say this because GitHub Copilot, I think when you sign up, it's going to try to get you to sign up for that. I would hold off. Also because you get 60 free days of it. And so I would wait until you actually know how to code, right? Until you actually go through your languages to actually get the full benefit of it. So if it tries to get you to sign up, don't do it. That's the end of it. Okay. Any other questions? Cool. All right. I will stop the recording there.